Thank you everyone for staying for what I think is the most international panel today. And my favorite one, because I'm a former journalist fellow of the Institute. My name is Eduardo Suárez. I'm also the head of Editorial of the Reuters Institute right now. And I'm here today with three of our brilliant journalist fellows from three very different countries, from three very different news organizations as well, and people with very different backgrounds as well, and very different roles. So I think it's going to be a very interesting and very diverse conversation about the topic. First of all, I would like to introduce them. To my left here is Jazmín Acuña. Jazmín is from Paraguay, and she is the co-founder and editorial director of El Surtidor, which is a very innovative news organization in that country. Then we have Sannuta Raghu. Sannuta is the head of the AI lab at Schell, an Indian news organization. And she's actually working on an AI project here at the Institute. She may discuss that later. And then on the far left over there is Schell. Katya is a very good friend of the Institute. She was a journalist fellow with us for 3 months last year. And I deeply, strongly recommend her project, which we will discuss probably later, and deals with labeling content, something that also Amy and Richard discussed before in the presentation. So very, very interesting paper. I will try to discuss with them AI stories, which is, at the heart of the title of the talk. And I would like to cover 3 dimensions. AI stories with AI as subject matter and how it is covered. But also AI in the sense of all the experiments that we are seeing now in many newsrooms and how they are, reshaping how newsrooms work. And at the end, if we have some time, we will probably also cover a bit how AI is reshaping the way that we deliver the news to audiences, which is something that the previous panel also discussed a bit. Just before we start, saying hello to our friends on Zoom, I think we are gonna do a couple of polls with the same question to them. And this time the poll is gonna be, which word best describes your attitude towards a news ecosystem in which AI plays a more prominent role? That would be a question, and the words are hopeful, indifferent, and fearful. And well, we'll know perhaps in 5 minutes what is more or less the mood of the, online community, and we'll try to poll that again at the end and see if, this panel is changing minds either in a good way or in a bad way. So let's see that. Okay, let's start talking about AI as subject matter, which is something that obviously is part of the conversation. And I would like to start doing a very quick round here, because you are all from very different countries, different continents, to know, which kind of stories you see reported in your own countries or by your news organizations. Let's start with you, Jazmín.
Okay, so I'm going to speak for Paraguay, but I think this also applies to other countries in Latin America. Stories about AI on news outlets, I think, still lack a critical angle. Most stories about AI are cornered to the technology section of news outlets, and they focus a lot on products and capabilities. They highlight, innovation, efficiency, and also their market features. And when the stories are not part of the tech section, they're usually about how the government or private firms are adopting AI. So, for instance, you read stories about how the government is going to use AI to catch criminals on the streets without much questioning, or how authorities want to attract foreign investors to use our clean and cheap energy for AI-related projects like data centers. Most recently, we have seen some stories on how Paraguay and most Latin American countries are falling behind in the AI and tech development race in general. This is true for my country, like I said, but a handful of other countries like Brazil and Chile are ahead. They have national AI strategies, but that's not the case for most of the region. And I think it's promising to see more commentaries on the need to at least pay more attention and regulate AI. But I think in general, coverage is still very optimistic, and we're not covering it from a critical point of view, from a more political point of view. Yeah.
So non-critical, driven by the industry mostly, I guess. Does that ring a bell for India, Sannuta?
Uh, kind of, and also maybe we need to look at how we define stories, right? Because I come from an engineer factory of the world, which means that we have a very distinct sort of engineer influencer space. So a lot of the news providing, a lot of the contextualization and the learning and building around AI is happening through sort of those actors. There are very few journalists, independent, most of them in independent organizations, who are doing very important work, stellar work, but it's too little, and they are leading the journalistic coverage of this. But the mainstream media, not so much, very sadly. And the sense making around policy is largely coming from the lawyers and the digital rights organizations. And again, this is largely on social media. So what we see, and maybe we could extrapolate this to other parts of the world, which is the one-to-many space is struggling to get a grip with what this is, but the many-to-many space is really thriving. So that's largely what's happening.
That's a very good point, because obviously India is a country, you know, dominated by YouTube and social media and all that. So that's part of it. What about Austria? What about the old Europe? Do you recognize the same issues, Katya? Or
Speak on behalf of whole Europe. I can speak about German-speaking countries, Central Europe. Well, it's quite similar as to what we've heard. I'd say the coverage is mainly hype-driven still. The coverage is extremely technology-focused, and sort of the attitude that's seeping through all this coverage is either euphoric or it's sort of scared. And both of these stances are not ideal. I think we can be have a consensus on that. I mean, it's also, as you said, it's just too much sometimes, I have the impression, yeah? Legal, technology, society. When it comes to the impact of the new technology on society, sometimes the coverage sounds almost like clueless, yeah? So it's very much the hype, buying into the hype, but then, and what will this do to us? and it ends with the question, which is not a good thing, I think. I don't think journalism that asks questions to the audience is good journalism. Yeah.
That's correct. And I would like you very briefly to cover the other side of it, which is all those AI stories that perhaps are undercover or underreported, or that we just are not paying enough attention to those. What those would be, Sannuta, or yeah.
Well, I think the aspect of regulation, especially in Europe, is a story that should be told in a much more much more explainable way, because we do have the EU AI Act, and I think almost everybody has heard about it, but nobody really knows what it means. And also, in the tale of DeepSeek and so on, we also had this movement, well, maybe we're also getting behind, and it's the AI Act's fault. And regulation, is it good or bad? I mean, regulation is a very sensitive topic for journalists, of course, because we don't like being told what we are allowed to do. So this is really, I mean, Europe has the potential to become an innovative, safe space, but we don't tell this story.
Yeah, and legislation that you just mentioned from Europe, everyone is looking everyone in other places in the world are looking at that particular piece of legislation as well. What about India, Sannuta?
Yeah, I think the scale that we operate at, there's almost zero coverage about environmental impact and the mitigation and what mitigation could look like. We just had the largest religious gathering on earth with about 660 million people estimated sort of attending. We know that facial recognition technology has been used for a very long time. I haven't really seen an investigative piece on that. There's a lot of talk about AI slop. The guesstimate is that India could be the motherlode of this in a way, but but I really haven't seen. There's a lot of AI slop coverage in other parts of the world, and also the conversation around AI I think in many parts of the world is largely restricted to large language models. And the understanding is then sort of, streamlined into that. And we're not really going beyond LLMs and chatbots and what they can do. So, yeah.
It's the shiniest thing and everyone goes there, right? What about you,
Very
Jazmín?
similar, I would say. Stories that are missing are the ones with a human rights perspective. I think we're not asking sufficiently enough what is the social purpose of certain forms of technology or at what cost they're advancing in our region. So, for instance, Latin America has become the destination point of data centers, which is affecting communities that are already vulnerable in far remote areas with water and energy disruption. This is true now for my country with crypto mining data centers, but it can get worse if we start attracting more foreign investors with AI related projects. So I think, we're not talking enough about how AI systems need intensive use of resources and how this can also hinder climate goals. We should talk more about that. And we're not talking, I think, enough about the risk of perpetuating linguistic inequalities with the adoption of certain models, or also, and this is very important, I think, the national security implications of adopting certain models that are not home built. And I can think.
We'll discuss languages a little bit later. I would like briefly to cover the influence on politics, Sannuta, because obviously last year was a big year for elections everywhere, but particularly in India, which is the biggest democracy in the world, and we saw some impact. Obviously, probably not so much as expected before the election happened. But I would like you to cover a little bit of that. How was perceived basically by audiences, by voters, because we know that campaigns use that quite a lot, right?
Yeah, they were very successful, at least on the face of it. My colleague Karen Rebello is so much more equipped to answer this question. But widely used again across political parties. Translation was a big area. We had political leaders. We have 22 official languages in India, which means political leaders from one part of the country could very easily communicate with people in from a very different language set. That happened. We saw this very strange phenomenon where old leaders were resurrected, and that gave, and these are deep fakes, of course. So people, it gave hope for some reason to people, and that got a lot of engagement. And of course, the other thing is this new breed of political consultants doing AI, right? Which is, they're using no-code tools. They are not necessarily computer engineers, and they're building huge business around this. So I would say India was, you could look at it as a checklist almost of what could be applied to different parts of the country when it comes to AI. And I'm assuming that, not assuming, but I'm quite sure that the audience was responded very well to this.
I'm sure that we will see many of those things in other countries quite soon, if not yet. Very briefly to finish this part of the conversation, when preparing the panel, we also discussed examples of bad coverage. And I would like to bring Katya here because she's such an expert on this. And you mentioned a couple of examples, right, that you thought that, it was not very good. Can you share them?
I wouldn't want to call it bad examples, but maybe example for sort of incomplete coverage. The most recent one, and I'm sure all of you have heard about that as well, was the Italian newspaper Il Foglio that announced that it had launched an experiment. The newspaper would be complemented by a completely AI-generated newspaper for some weeks or months. And I've read that. I read that in our own newswire. I've read similar stories, or perhaps based on our stories in others. But I had a lot of questions, of course. Which system? Why? What is the objective of this experiment? What's the workflow? Is there a human in the loop? Is there a journalist in control? Many questions, but they weren't asked. Obviously, because they would have answered by the reports. And my suspicion is that those colleagues who reported on it just didn't know which questions to ask, And some news outlets, they did make an effort and they looked at the product. And then I think it was The Guardian that wrote, the sentences read okay and were grammatically correct, which is, I think, not the way to assess an AI-generated news product. I mean, yeah. Good for you. So I was thinking, what's wrong here? Yeah? And I was especially thinking about this because we were part of the problem, because one of the first articles on that were from my colleague in Italy, and I know she's not an expert on AI. So how could we improve, how could we sort of infuse our reporting on this topic with more? So we're trying to develop a strategy on that, actually. So perhaps forming a cross-beat team. We are actually educating more than 80 company-wide, more than 80 AI buddies right now, which is going to be colleagues in the teams, which special knowledge on AI and so on. But yeah, I think this is something that, for example, what does the audience, what does the user do with a story like this? It's just, I'm not sure.
I was going to use, related to that, I was going to use the analogy of climate, because I think it's a good one, and you mentioned that when preparing the panel, in the sense that climate is such an issue that touches on so many things and so many bits in the newsroom. Like, it touches on, definitely on environment, but also on the economy, in politics, even on sports, on fashion, on many other topics. And I don't know if there is a way to basically try to train journalists that are not actually covering AI, 100% of their time, but they will come across increasingly with this topic, which is embedded on the things that they are covering, right?
I think just like the climate crisis, AI, as really the broad concept of AI, is going also to have an impact on the individual level, on every person, and we can't just ignore that. And it's not enough to have some specialists. There has to be basic knowledge. And I mean, there are already the means. Journalism education has to take this into account. And for example, and there is stuff out there to make use of. For example, UNESCO has published a handbook on reporting on AI aimed at journalism educators. There are some very straightforward do's and don'ts that every journalist should know, like written by Felix Simon on behalf of the European Broadcasting Union. It's actually the basic understanding and the basic grasp of how to report on AI. It's not rocket science. It's not even deep science. But we should realize and recognize the need for it, and that's still missing, I think.
I think this is a good moment to actually tell our in-person audience the results of the poll of our online audience. And as we, if you remember, we asked them, if they were hopeful or fearful about a news ecosystem more, with AI in a more prominent role. Well, 41% of the audience is hopeful, 49% is fearful, and the rest are indifferent. So half and half, although fearful people are more, at least for now. So let's see if that changes over our conversation. Let's turn now to AI experiments, because I know that you all have done your own experiments in your news organizations, and I would like you to describe in a few sentences what you have done, what you have learned from that, and if that has finally been implemented in the organization or just something that you ruled out. Yeah. Jazmín.
Yeah, I'll talk about a successful experiment. We developed a chatbot that allows our users, I don't like to use the word users, I don't know why, but that allows our readers to engage with and sort of have a dialogue with the story of a woman who is in prison on drug trafficking charges. The project is called Eva. We wanted to explore better ways to convey the failure of the war on drugs in Latin America through the story of women. Because women, are usually the weakest links in the drug trafficking business. They're often involved in micro trafficking crimes, while you have drug overlords free, basically, and sometimes even doing deals with the state. So instead of giving our readers a plain text, we wanted to provide them with a more dynamic experience. So through the chatbot, they can ask our source directly why she's in jail, how is it like, what she eats, and things like that. It's important to know that we didn't use AI to generate content. All the answers that you get in the chatbot are the exact words from the interviews. We didn't want to run with the risk of hallucinations and misrepresent such an important and sensitive story. Here, AI help us better predict what our audience might ask a woman in that situation. So we use it to train the chatbot to understand the different ways a person might ask the same question. And I think we learned a lot of things. One of them is that AI can serve storytelling purposes more than, generating content. And that with these conversational formats, you can co-design the path of a story with the audience. So it's a very empowering thing that you can provide to your audience, that they decide how they're going to approach a story. And yeah, we also learned that if we let the chatbot use AI to generate the answers, it could also erase the native indigenous language that our source use, and we didn't want that. So that's why we took great care, in the answers aspect of the project.
A good way to create empathy as well, I guess. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
What about you, Sannuta?
I'll tell you a little bit about our latest experiment, which is we're testing what the fundamental unit of information for news could be. So what a news atom could look like. And what you could do with this is basically bring multiple atoms together and modularize it, convert it, and create a podcast, a short video, a calculator, what have you, right? So to be able to do this, what does a news atom look like? And the final goal is to be able to give our audience what they want to consume at the time they want to consume, in a format they want to consume, so that they are not overloaded with the information that's present in a 700-word article, for example, right? So we're trying to move beyond the article as a form of delivery for news. It's also an interesting bet because this is it's platform agnostic. So we're taking steps to see if we could be a sustainable destination. Don't know how that would work, but we're experimenting with that. Yeah.
Very interesting, and something that we have been discussing for a while, right? The death of the article, or at least going beyond it in terms of consuming news. What about the Austrian press agency? Because this is a very different news organization. How do you think about that?
B2B outlet, so to
Exactly.
speak. Our experiments or our development R&D activities are rather industry focused. My most favorite recent experiment is developing a tool that provides alternative text for infographics, not only telling the user there's an infographic and it's a chart, but sort of retelling what the figures say, which is great because that's sort of a blind spot in the efforts to provide access to information for visual impaired people. But I mean the thing with experiments in the field of AI, or I'd say in general in journalism, with journalism as a highly technology-driven business, is experiments are fine and they are great, fun, you learn a lot, but what's going to happen when you're finished with the experiment? And this is something we see a lot in Europe. You have shiny prototypes, proof of concepts and so on, and then you don't really know what to do. And I've read it someplace, I think actually it was our own chief digital officer, but perhaps he quoted someone else. AI experiments or AI projects are about 20% about AI, or maybe 30 or 15 or 18, I don't know. But it's not so much AI actually. And the rest is just trying to get the thing running in your productive environment. And the hurdles are immense sometimes.
How would you describe those challenges for the people here in the audience and also online? Because you have actually gone that route. What are the challenges that you are encountering and how to overcome them?
On the one hand, what I call the application landscape, the existing production systems, many publishers still are operating legacy systems that aren't even fit to implement fancy new AI functionalities. It's just not possible. Actually, it's the same. It's the case at Apple. We are developing our new editorial system, but the old one is like, it's like a creaky, okay, I'll do that last for you, but please stop giving me new stuff. Yeah, so, and it's really, the effort is, and it's expensive. Yeah. The other thing is that the workflows, technology drives journalism, but that's not the only driving factor. So to expect that the new technology or even new applications will change how your organization works, like magic, this won't work. Yeah. Yeah.
Of course.
And yeah,
Yeah,
it's also, and the last thing, the question how you communicate all this to your newsroom and your staff. Would you tell them, oh, well, we've got some new fancy technology, use it? No, of course not, but yeah.
Yeah, of course, and people might get nervous because they think that they are going to be replaced and so on.
They might get disappointed because AI is supposed to be the new shiny, can do it all, and actually no, it can't. It's not so good. It isn't. Yeah. So
I think Sannuta wanted to add something. Yeah.
So we have a text-to-video tool that we built out with the hope of creating, as many videos as we want for short shelf life videos, and we didn't have the capacity to do it at that time. But one of our biggest learnings while implementing that was, so our social media team was sort of the frontline staff on this. And we have a stated policy again of human in the loop that we're going to, but the amount of pressure that this puts on that frontline, employee to sort of keep up, to sort of go through it with a fine-tooth comb. I think we also need to have sort of, proper training in place to make sure that when we say human in the loop, we are able to sort of empower them, show massive empathy, because they are doing that in addition to the job that they're meant to do, which is, manage social media for the organization. So that was a huge thing. And also when we say human in the loop, like I said, we are able to produce 10,000 videos if required. But my editor said, no, we are humanly possible. It's humanly possible for us to look at 15 videos, and that's how much we'll do, because we want to make sure that, nothing inaccurate goes out.
That's the thing. I mean, it shouldn't clash with the goals.
Absolutely. So it's a bit of a catch-22 where the potential you have is, to possibly create 1 million videos a day, but what you're humanly able to do is 15.
Yeah. It's always funny to hear people, especially journalists, talking about AI slop and not really recognizing sometimes that news organizations are actually creating AI slop increasingly. But at least I see it in local news organizations in the UK and in other countries. So it's important to recognize that.
For ethics codes too, very important before deploying these technologies in the newsrooms.
Absolutely. I wanted to discuss briefly with Sannuta and with Jazmín, and perhaps you can pitch into about languages. You discussed languages before and the potential, obviously, of AI to reach out to audiences that either because they are indigenous peoples or because they are minority languages or people that you usually don't reach with your content. How do you see that developing right now? Because I'm sure that you have tried Scroll and you've done a couple of projects, I think, also on the,
Well, definitely there's still a major linguistic gap in current AI systems. And in Paraguay, we have 2 languages. We speak Spanish and we also speak Guarani, which is the indigenous language. More than 7 million people speak it. And it's an oral language, so we don't have that many written records to train models. And so this means, for instance, that tools like chatbots that can facilitate connection with our audiences have a limitation because some people can only speak Guarani and chatbots don't get it, for instance. So we have a project, we're working on it. We are trying to raise awareness about the issue through the project and also address this linguistic gap. With the project, what we want to do is we want to improve data sets for LLMs through collaboration with our Guarani speaking audience. And ultimately, what we want to do is develop a WhatsApp chatbot that's capable of understanding spoken Guarani that will also enable interaction between my news outlet and that Guarani speaking audience. We say it's a community-based chatbot, like we want it to respond to our needs. And I think another main output of this project will be a method that media organizations and any other entities that want to serve oral language audiences, can use. And of course, we're aware that, and we don't want to, we cannot fill the linguistic gap, but we want to show that it is possible, that you can have a method. And hopefully, I think the major outcome of this project will be to get the government, interested and in charge of their responsibility, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, as you said, it's a language spoken by millions.
7 million people in Argentina too, in Bolivia, and you also have the migrant communities in Spain. Yeah, exactly.
Are you facing the same problems in India, even if, I guess population is even more massive for some of these languages, right?
I was just going to say, I take your 7 million and I raise to 500 million Hindi speakers, which is it's still sort of it baffles me that the training data used to for a language like Hindi is still so archaic. So the output that you get is very, very archaic. So three large problems when it comes to sort of linguistic issues in my part of the world, which is so we have, and most of Asia has this, is we speak in code mixed language. We have, English words, Hindi words, Marathi words sort of bunched together while we converse, which means that to create an effective data set for text to speech becomes very, very difficult. The other problem is that, there is lack of contextual and nuanced training data across the board. So you talk about LLMs, you talk about, speech, you talk about sort of everything that requires that kind of data. And the other complexity is the way we write and the way we speak is different. So you require, again, very specific data for conversation. You require very specific data for written documents. And our government, so we have 22 official languages, our government is kind of trying to solve it at a very massive scale with a program called Bhashini. And that would impact not only India, but a large part of the South Asian region, which has these languages as part of their main language. So Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Pakistan. So the efforts are happening, but it's too complex a problem for it for us to immediately use it, because accuracy is our main thing. So when do we get there? We don't know, but the work is on.
Just to be clear, because I'm not familiar, and perhaps some people here are not familiar, what happens if you speak in Hindi to ChatGPT or to Google Gemini? Does it respond in that language or just doesn't produce anything?
So DeepSeek doesn't. Doesn't in the sense it gives you gibberish. ChatGPT gives you very, very archaic outputs. So words we don't use today, but probably were used, in the early 1900s, late 1800s.
It's kind of funny. It's like
it's very funny. It's very funny. Yeah. For the other languages, I mean, no chance. They don't really stand a chance yet. And the funny part is, so when we tried to, again, for our text to video tool, we needed a voiceover layer. And none of the models get the pronunciation of Indian names. Like proper nouns are a huge problem when it comes to speech. So very Americanized pronunciation of all proper nouns. No context to some of the institutions, some of our abbreviations. Yeah.
Quite amazing. So, Katja, what about German language?
Yeah, well,
don't tell me that it speaks like Stefan Zweig or something like that. Yeah.
It is a sort of an issue actually in Austria, but it's a luxury problem. But there are certain words that would set any Austrian off because they're German, not Austrian German. And we have to be careful not to use them. And it's relatively easy not to use them. But of course it shows, because language, those models, if we're talking about large language models, they use language to transport, I'd say, mimicry knowledge. And if you ask in the wrong even version of German, I give you 8 million Austrian-speaking people, it's a very tiny, let's not start about Switzerland because I don't understand how they talk. But if you don't know which German to use, then you won't get the output you deserve, I'd say. Yeah. But we're aware of regions and countries and languages, even in Europe, of course. I mean, think of Latvia or something. Because where does the data set come from? Those are also languages that have been written for 100 years at most. Yeah.
Well, maybe this is a good moment to go to the third and final part of the conversation, which is using AI to rethink how we deliver news to audiences, so more like a more broad or a broader focus, right? And I want to ask actually Katya, because you prepared this project that we published, I think, in January, which kind of deals a bit with this, which is basically about how we label content in a world where probably every piece of content or most pieces of content are using AI in some way, either as transcript or translation or many other ways. So how would you describe the answer that you came up with?
Well, let me first say that I'm fully aware that the project I did has a best before date, because I think some of the examples you gave today, I think that generative AI and the next generations of it have the potential to change how we do journalism for good. And this would be the first new technology in ages that doesn't change how we produce or how we distribute journalism, but how we actually do it. Yeah. Talking about conversational, talking about, rags and so on. So I'm not sure if the system I thought of will be relevant in 5 years or 2 years. Yeah. But the thing is, and we saw the chart from the Reuters Institute's research, I mean, on the one hand, the audience, they want to know, but they don't actually know what to do with the knowledge, and they don't know actually enough about the use cases, and they don't know enough about journalism. That's full stop. And on the other hand, there's the industry and there's the journalists to say, yeah, what if I use this, what if I use that, and when is the impact big enough on my journalism that I should be transparent about it? And I've just came up with sort of a approach or to define what is autonomy, because in the end it's about the one slider, human and machine, and who has more autonomy. But what is autonomy in journalism? For us as journalists, we decide what to do, whom to ask, which material to use, which material to discard. So decision to publish, not to publish more. And how many of those decisions do we sort of delegate to a semi-autonomous system? That's one thing. And the other thing, and then this comes from me being actually having studied literature and being a literature person, who's the author? Because we're writing text, and we don't just produce texts, we don't spit them out, we don't spit out slob, those generic, sure, here's your article, we tell stories. So how much of the storytelling is delegated again to a machine, or how much of the, who's the author of the piece? And that question stems from my very first experience with one of our first experiments with not generative AI, but rule-based AI in 2019, when we started our automated election reporting. So, we had the templates, we wrote the texts, and data-driven, the machine choose which story to produce and which,
with local
numbers, yeah, with local election data. And when the first story ever was generated, I looked at it and I was like, oh, it's I did that. No, I didn't. Did I? And I was really confused. And I started thinking about, all those big French philosophers, Roland Barthes, Michel Foucault, l'auteur est mort, la la. And I thought, well, the author isn't dead because she's sitting here, but she certainly didn't do this job. So what's happening here? So I think these are sort of useful factors to decide, is it necessary to disclose the involvement of AI in this piece of journalism?
Yeah, that's a good segue to speak a bit about Sannuta's idea that you described before about this kind of basic unit of information and how you combine that in different forms, articles, or even not articles, just chatbots or whatever. How do you see authorship on that? Because I guess that those would be like pieces of content that would be produced by many people, right? Or maybe have been produced like before, and you kind of bring them out again for a new story.
We're thinking through it. We don't have the answers. But I think, so again, so if you sort of zoom out 2 layers and say, what could the news atom be really based on, right? So if you say that it's based on an event, and that's what news does. So the fundamental unit could be based on an event. So the authorship there could be who brought us that event and who reported that event. Because, you know, the thing I think we keep missing is within LLMs is sort of a closed box, right? All data that goes into it is the one that's being churned. But we need someone to come from the outside and add new data to this, right? So, and it is going to be a human who's adding this data. So at the atom level, for the person who is bringing this information about whatever event, should be the author, is what we're thinking now. Again, we've also had conversation. Again, this is evolving sort of every day, right? So I wouldn't say that I have 100% sort of even clarity on this. But somebody asked me the other day, if we have these atoms and, you know, we're just going to be, you know, sort of curating these atoms and making whatever we want on demand through it, then, you know, what is the role of a journalist within this? And, you know, are we just, like, what are we doing really? Are we just filling up a JSON file and, you know, not really investing in, you know, beautifully writing an article or whatever else? But the answer to that, again, we're thinking through this, but is that we're creators of meaning and curation. So we are the meaning layer to it. If I as a journalist know to take this and this atom to do this, it's coming from, if you ask ChatGPT today with, you know, whatever querying that you're doing, you need to guide it a lot. It's not okay, you ask it a question and you take it at face value. It requires a lot of guiding. So it's not there. Will it get better in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Maybe. But I think the meaning giving and the curation will still very largely come from us, and which then means that the authorship does lie with the people who brought this together.
May I just add, because these are very good examples. I think in a strange way, the concept of authorship is both overlooked in journalism, but also exaggerated. Yeah, because writing this one beautiful story and this like archetypical image of the male journalist spending all his day on one big beautiful article, which, by the way, most of the times isn't that beautiful, but it's his opus. Yeah. And I think this is outdated. Yeah. But like you say, storytelling is not necessarily producing one coherent piece of text. It's much more. Yeah.
We are now asking the same question to our friends on Zoom to see if they have become more hopeful or more fearful after the panel. Let's see. I'm going to ask a final question to you, all very brief, because I would like to have one question from the audience too. But it's about trust. I mean, we saw the chart that Amy showed before, that most people, by a large majority actually, think that AI is going to make the news less trustworthy or less trusted. Do you agree? Because on the one hand, I agree with that. On the other hand, I see also opportunities. Like many people think that the news and journalism is too partisan, for example, or is not accurate enough. And perhaps there's some opportunities there, but how do you see that? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the new world?
Well, I'm looking at this in my project in a way. I think technology will not help or worsen the relationship between news and audiences. That's what I think. I think it is our approach to audiences that will make the difference. If we are thinking about AI and how it can help us produce content, or if we are very worried about traffic and referrals, which I understand, I just believe that I don't think we'll get very far. because I think a content-centric approach divert us from other things that we can do very well. We have data about how younger generations and new audiences are looking for connection, they're looking for meaning, they're looking for belonging. Have you watched Adolescence? What are we gonna do with if you haven't, you should. Like, what are we gonna do with those kids that are gonna become men at some point who are looking for connection? So I do think journalists have a role in that, in community building, community participation. If we think about the impact that our work can have on the lives of people, communities, and societies, I think that can get us somewhere better. And I think AI can assist us in the work of designing the strategies that can get us there. Yeah,
that's a very good point about connections, of course. Sannuta.
In our testing, what we sort of primarily saw again and again and again is if there are proxies for humans, if there's any layer of pretense, then it's immediately rejected and you're branded sort of untrustworthy. We spent a lot of time again in our text to video tool optimizing for an illustrated AI avatar, to be the teller of the story on the video. But people hated it, and anything that looks that is a proxy for humans in a very outright way, I think that is rejected. Again, like I said, we have a huge problem with the way names are pronounced. So if we use voiceovers with an American accent, immediately rejected. We are bashed very publicly for, what are you doing, and then that sort of reduces our trust points big time. So I would say, yeah, pretense and like proxy for humans is a huge thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Katia.
I really have to pull myself together not to become too cynic, because the trust issue, we've been discussing it loudly and publicly for almost 10 years now, because the first wave of fake news panic was one of the... And we don't really know anything. We don't know how to prevent the sort of eroding trust of our audiences into mainstream media. And yes, AI might be a factor, it might not, but there are so many others we can't control, and I'm really sort of, I don't know. It's really...
There's a very big orange one in the White House right now, so...
Yeah, you see, I mean, that's something politicians and players that actively sort of try to just undermine trust in democratic institutions like good media. So yes, of course, because they feel not overly informed about AI, but I don't think AI will have a big part in diminishing trust in news media, because it can only sort of enhance an existing development, an existing trend, I think. Yeah. Yes, and I don't really see what we can do against that.
That's a very good point, and also the fact that many of these things will be mediated through platforms. So we will be actors, but we will also suffer the consequences of actors actually doing things on this space. We're going now to the room here. Anyone has a question for the panel? We can take perhaps like a couple of questions, quick. Nico.
Hi, thank you so much. This was wonderful insights and made us all fellows very proud, all four of you. My question is about, I'm going to take data centers that was mentioned here, but also in class. And we had this in Greece too, where a data center in the north of Greece was built. And even the local community next to them planned their Microsoft data centers, didn't know that they were being built. So I'm wondering, as journalists, how do we both communicate these stories to the audiences that matter, that are AI related but have physical implications, but also use these people as sources more when we do tell these AI stories? And then a second component of this is whether you think we can jeopardize our sources with tech companies when sometimes we're critical about reporting, because in my experience this has happened not with AI but with other technology, that you kind of sabotage the relationship and then lose exclusivity that competitive press that is more favorable gets.
Okay, let's take this one actually, because it's two questions. Who wants to respond to Nico's first or second question?
Well, I'm not sure I got the point of the second question, but it might be. So you mean to jeopardize the relation to your sources by using by exposing them using technology, or?
More the sources that are coming from the sources that are coming from the tech companies that you may need for these AI stories, whether writing critical reporting can jeopardize your connection. This has happened to me in the past with a big tech company when we wrote a critical article and then we severed that connection. So it went, the exclusive rights of whatever they could provide went to a competitive media.
I see, but is this a specifically AI-related problem? I'd ask, because you could have this with big advertisement customers as well, or I mean, critical reporting is always has sort of the danger of doing some harm also to yourself, because you might bite the hand that feeds you, or you might bite the hand that your company wants to partner up with. I don't know. So it's.
I guess what is different from advertisers, and I think it's probably what Nico was meaning is, of course, advertisers influence or can influence coverage, but in this case are sometimes providers or people suppliers basically of products that you're using, right? So the relationship, and sometimes even even these partnerships are announced, right, between The Guardian and OpenAI, or the FT and OpenAI, and that can complicate things, and also the perception of the audience, even if there's nothing wrong, right?
Yeah. Still, I mean, if your reporting sort of ruins a potential deal, that would be the thing. I think it should be also up to management and what's the general strategy of the company, because if the company is sort of so dependent on this potential deal that your room for reporting would be limited, then I think there's an issue that's not AI related either, And I don't mean your specific company, it's general, it's something, yeah.
On your first question, I think it's about distribution. Like, you really need to think, if you want to serve audiences that are affected by the issue you're reporting on, just make sure that you know how those communities receive information and make the effort to reach those channels. That's, I think, very, very important when it comes to reporting on, for instance, data centers, like you mentioned, which is happening in my country, in many countries in South America. And we're doing a report on that, actually, of one data center that has been causing a lot of trouble with sounds. People have become ill because the sounds are so disturbing. So we're gonna write about that, and hopefully we'll get more people, aware of what's happening in their communities by reading that report. And what we want to do after publishing that report is we want to give people decibel monitors so that they can monitor sound levels in their communities, and hopefully have a follow-up report that's crowdsourced. That's a way also of getting communities affected by these developments involved also in the reporting in a way. Yeah.
One final question from the audience. Who wants to? Very shy people. Come on, there are many journalists here. No one wants to ask a question?
We might have said everything.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to announce, the result of the poll, the final poll. And I have a headline, actually, because we went on hopeful, we went from 41% to 45%. And on fearful, we went from 49% to 42%. So we can officially say that we made people hopeful with this panel, which I really appreciate. And something that will probably make all these people more hopeful, hopefully also those at home, is that we are not going to have the lunch break. So we can speak to each other and do all the networking. And we will be back here online at 13:45, hopefully. So everyone watching online, we will be back in an hour and 15 minutes or so. So give a great hand of applause to these people.